In the forests of Gombe, Tanzania, a young woman sat perfectly still amongst the chimpanzees, watching, waiting, and listening. She had no formal scientific training, no doctorate, no credentials that would traditionally open the doors of academia. What she had was something far more powerful. An unshakable dream, boundless patience, and a revolutionary belief that animals were not mere subjects to be studied, but individuals with personalities, emotions, and stories of their own. That young woman was Jane Goodall. And she would go on to transform our understanding of what it means to be human by showing us how much we share with our closest living relatives. Her life stands as a testament to the power of curiosity, compassion, and conviction. A reminder that one person, armed with nothing but passion and perseverance, can change the world. Jane's story begins not in the African wilderness, but in the modest town of Bournemouth, England, where she was born in 1934. Even as a child, she displayed the qualities that would define her life's work. At 18 months old, she took earthworms to bed with her, concerned for their well-being. At 5, she spent hours hiding in a henhouse, determined to discover where eggs come from, emerging triumphant with the answer after her family had searched for her in total panic. These weren't the antics of an ordinary child. They were early stirrings of a scientific mind coupled with profound empathy. While other girls dreamed of conventional futures, Jane discovered the Tarzan books, falling in love with the idea of Africa and its wild inhabitants. She made a promise to herself. One day, she would live amongst the animals in Africa. In post-war England, such dreams seemed impossibly distant for a young woman without means or connections. Jane couldn't afford university, so she took secretarial courses and she worked various jobs, all while keeping her African dream alive. And then at 23, the opportunity knocked. A school invited her to visit Kenya, and Jane did what dreamers do. She saved every penny, quit her job, and bought a ticket to the continent that had called her since childhood. It was in Kenya that Jane's life took its defining turn. She met the legendary paleontologist Louis Leakey, who recognized in this enthusiastic young woman something remarkable. A mind that was unencumbered by scientific dogma, eyes willing to see what others might overlook, and a patience that couldn't be taught. When Leakey sought someone to study wild chimpanzees in Tanzania, he chose Jane. Not despite her lack of formal training, but perhaps because of it. In 1960, at just 26 years old, Jane Goodall arrived at Gombe Stream National Park. The scientific establishment was skeptical. The task seemed impossible. Chimpanzees were known to be elusive, and no one had successfully conducted a long-term study of wild apes. For the first months, Jane would barely get close to the chimpanzees, who fled at her even gentle approach. Many would have just given up, let's be honest. But Jane persisted. And then, slowly and miraculously, the chimps began to accept her presence. She gave them each names. David Greybeard, Flo, Fifi, Goliath. This was a practice that was completely scandalized by scientists because in the traditional scientific world, they insisted research subjects should be numbered, not named. But Jane understood something so much deeper, so much more profound. These were not specimens. They were individuals. What she discovered in the forests of Gombe would rewrite the textbooks. She observed chimpanzees making and using tools, like stripping the leaves from twigs to fish for termites. Until that moment, tool making was considered a uniquely human trait, the defining characteristic that separated us from other animals. But Jane's observation completely shattered that assumption. As Louis Leakey famously responded to her findings, he said, quote, "Now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as human," unquote. But Jane's revelations went far beyond tool use. She documented chimpanzees engaging in cooperative hunting, displaying complex emotions like joy and grief and jealousy. They were forming deep family bonds, and they even were engaging in what could only be described as warfare between rival groups. She showed the world that chimpanzees, and by extension other animals, possessed rich inner lives. That line between human and animal was far less clear than we had imagined. But her work faced resistance. Critics claimed that she was anthropomorphizing, projecting human qualities onto animals. Jane stood firm, though, armed with thousands of hours of careful observation. She wasn't imposing human traits on chimps. She was simply reporting what she saw. Eventually, the scientific community had no choice but to acknowledge the truth of her findings. Jane earned her PhD from Cambridge without ever having obtained a bachelor's degree, an almost unheard of achievement. For decades, Jane might have remained in the paradise of Gombe, continuing her groundbreaking research, but in the 1980s, she attended a conference focused on chimpanzee conservation and research, and what she learned horrified her. Across Africa, chimpanzee populations were plummeting due to habitat destruction, poaching, and illegal pet trade. In research laboratories, chimps were confined to small cages, subjected to invasive experiments. The very beings she had come to know as individuals, as persons, were suffering on a massive scale. Jane faced a choice: remain in her forest sanctuary, continuing her beloved research, or step into the wild world to fight for the chimps and their vanishing habitats. For Jane, it was no choice at all. She transformed from researcher to advocate, becoming a voice for those who had no voice. She began traveling the world, speaking to audiences from corporate boardrooms to elementary school classrooms. She met with policymakers, testified before governments, and appeared in countless documentaries and interviews. Her message was both simple and profound. We were destroying the natural world, and in doing so, we're destroying ourselves. But it's not too late to change course. Jane's advocacy was rooted in something deeper than environmental concern. It was born from personal relationships with individual chimpanzees that she had known for decades. When she spoke about conservation, she didn't cite abstract statistics. She told stories about Flo, the magnificent matriarch, and her daughter Fifi, who became a matriarch herself. She described watching David Greybeard gently hold her hand, a moment of connection across species that brought tears to the eyes of audience members worldwide. Her work expanded beyond chimpanzees to encompass broader environmental and humanitarian concerns. She understood that you cannot save chimpanzees without addressing the needs of people living alongside them. Poverty, lack of education, and desperation were driving forces behind habitat destruction. True conservation required lifting up human communities as well as protecting wild ones. Perhaps no initiative better embodies Jane's philosophy than Roots and Shoots, the youth program that she founded in 1991. The name itself carries profound meaning. Roots spread underground, creating a foundation, while shoots seem small but can break through walls to reach the light. Young people, Jane believed, could do the same, creating strong foundations and breaking through the obstacles facing our planet. Roots and Shoots began with 12 students on Jane's back porch in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Today it spans over 6 countries with hundreds of thousands of members. The program empowers young people to identify problems in their communities, whether environmental, animal welfare related, or human related, and they take action to address those issues. What makes Roots and Shoots revolutionary is its recognition that young people are not merely the leaders of tomorrow, they are the leaders of today. Jane refused to condescend to youth or diminish their capacity for meaningful action. She saw in them the same qualities that defined her own journey: idealism, energy, and an unwillingness to accept the world as it is when it could be so much better. The projects undertaken by Roots and Shoots members range from cleaning polluted waterways to creating wildlife corridors, from establishing community gardens to advocating for animal welfare legislation. Each project, regardless of size, embodies Jane's conviction that individual action matters, that every person can make a difference. Through Roots and Shoots, Jane addressed one of her deepest concerns: the disconnect between modern humans and the natural world around us. Children grow up in cities. They might never see wild animals. They might never feel soil between their fingers. They might never understand their place in the web of life. This disconnection, Jane argued, was at the root of environmental destruction. How can we save what we don't know, what we don't understand, what we don't love? Throughout her decades of advocacy, Jane Goodall became known for her unwavering quality that seems almost radical in an age of environmental despair: hope. Not naive optimism, but informed and determined hope. The kind that acknowledged the darkness while insisting on the possibility of light. People constantly asked her, how do you remain hopeful in the face of such overwhelming challenges, from climate change to species extinction to habitat destruction? Well, her answer grew from 4 reasons, which she articulated in her books and her lectures. First, the amazing human intellect. The same creativity that created our problem can solve them. Second, the resilience of nature. Given the chance, ecosystems can recover. Species can rebound. Third, the power of young people. Their energy, enthusiasm, and refusal to give up. And fourth, the indomitable human spirit. The people who tackle seemingly impossible problems and refuse to quit. Jane's hope was not passively waiting, but active engagement. She walked the walk, spending more than 300 days a year traveling, speaking, advocating, inspiring. Even in her later years, when most would have earned retirement, Jane continued her relentless schedule, driven by a sense of responsibility to the chimpanzees who had given her so much, and to the planet that sustains us all. Her message evolved to encompass not just environmental conservation, but a holistic vision of planetary health. She spoke about the interconnectedness of all life, about how poverty, environmental destruction, and unsustainable consumption patterns were all linked. She challenged audiences to think about the consequences of their daily choices, what they ate, what they bought, and how they lived. She never descended into judgment or despair. Instead, she empowered people with the knowledge that every day we can make choices, and every choice makes a difference. Buy sustainable products, reduce consumption, support conservation efforts, vote for leaders who care about the environment, teach children to respect all living things. Each action might seem small, but millions of small actions create transformative change. As we reflect on Jane Goodall's extraordinary life, we confront a legacy that defines simple categorization. She is a scientist who revolutionized primatology and our understanding of animal cognition and behavior. She's a conservationist who has fought tirelessly to protect endangered species and habitats. She's an educator who has inspired generations to care about the natural world. She's a humanitarian who has worked to improve lives in communities around the globe. But perhaps most importantly, Jane Goodall was a bridge between humans and animals, between science and spirituality, between despair and hope, between the world as it is and the world that it could be. Her life demonstrates that credentials and conventional paths are not prerequisites for meaningful contribution. She shows us that patience, empathy, and careful observation can reveal truth that sophisticated equipment totally might miss. She proves that one person, starting with nothing but a dream and determination, can indeed change the world. The chimpanzees of Gombe continue to be studied today. many of them descendants of the individuals Jane first befriended more than 6 decades ago. It's the longest continuous study of wild animals in history, a living monument to Jane's dedication. Researchers have now followed some chimpanzee lineages through 4 generations, gaining unprecedented insights into social learning, cultural transmission, and family dynamics. But Jane's impact extends far beyond academic papers and research findings. She has fundamentally altered how humanity sees itself and its place in the natural world. In a world before Jane Goodall, many viewed animals as stimulus response machines, incapable of thought or emotion. After Jane, we could no longer deny the rich inner lives of our fellow creatures. This shift in perspective has profound implications for how we treat animals, how we conduct our research, and how we approach conservation, and ultimately how we understand what it means to be human. There's this photograph of Jane from her early days in Gombe. She sits in the forest floor watching the chimpanzees who are watching her in return. And in that moment of mutual observation, a bridge was built between these 2 species, these 2 different worlds. That bridge still stands, strengthened by decades of research, advocacy, and education. Jane Goodall's life reminds us that the boundaries we draw between ourselves and the natural world are artificial, and that we're not separate from nature, but we're part of it. That our fate is intertwined with the fate of every species on this planet. She's shown us that science without compassion is incomplete, and that knowledge without action is insufficient, that understanding without love misses the point. And as we face the enormous challenges of 21st century, from the climate change, biodiversity loss, environmental degradation, we need Jane's message now more than ever. We need her reminder that individual actions matter, that hope is a choice, that giving up is not an option. We need her example as a life lived in service to something greater than oneself. The young girl who smuggled earthworms into her bed, who hid in a hen house waiting for a hen to lay an egg, who dreamed of Africa where the world told her such dreams were impossible. That girl changed the world. She did it by refusing to accept limitations, by following her passion, by listening to what others dismissed, by caring deeply about other beings that were considered lesser. Jane Goodall's legacy is not just in the scientific papers, the conservation programs, or the youth she inspired. It's in every person who looks at an animal and sees an individual, who makes a sustainable choice, who refuses to give up hope, who believes that they too can make a difference. It's in the forests that are still standing, the chimpanzees that are still swinging through those trees, and the children who still dream of wild places. The forest at Gombe still stands. The chimpanzees there still thrive, and somewhere in the world, a young person is discovering Jane's story and feeling that spark of inspiration, a call to action, a dream beginning to take shape. This is Jane's true legacy. Not just what she's done, but what she has inspired others to do. In the end, Jane Goodall teaches us the most important lesson of all. That one life lived with purpose, passion, and compassion can illuminate the world. That the greatest scientific discoveries may come not from the laboratories, but from the patient observations and genuine connections we make. That hope is not naive, but necessary, and that the dream of one determined individual can indeed change everything. The young woman who sat in the forests of Gombe gave the world a gift. Not just knowledge, but wisdom. Not just data, but understanding. Not just facts, but hope. And for that, the world is immeasurably richer.